Hello, hello. Welcome to the September edition. It's still September. We still got a few days. September edition of the Eureka Whiskey Club. As always, my name is Trevor Tyler, and we are honored tonight to have a whiskey legend on the call. This is the second time that we've had Mr. Johnson on the call, and we're very excited to welcome back. Before we get into introducing Mr. Freddie Johnson, I do want to just take a minute to highlight some of the things we have going on in the club. This month was the double feature. We got the Eagle Rare and the Buffalo Trace barrel picks in the club. We also had a very exciting bottle go on sale on Monday at the restaurants from Good Times. It's bourbon finished in Hawaiian honey casks, so absolutely delicious. That's available for sale at that is eligible to all members to purchase. So a lot of exciting things. And then if you were fortunate enough to score a bottle of Willett 10-year family estate, congratulations. It is absolutely delicious. So we also got two prizes to give away tonight. First place prize, we're going to get an Eagle Rare swag bag. We got like a cool golf hat and a bunch of other things. And then second place, we have a Buffalo Trace swag bag to send out. So get your questions ready, put them in the chat, and we'll get to them. And without further ado, Mr. Freddie Johnson, please introduce yourself to the group.
Well, first off, Trevor, it's just Freddie. It's just Freddie. I think back in doing things with Lincoln Henderson and Jimmy Russell and Elmer T. Lee and all these old whiskey guys. And I used to do the same thing. And I would say, "Oh, Mr. Lee," and he would look at me and he'd scowl. And I would say, "Is everything okay?" And he says, "Please just call me Elmer." And I just never could get used to calling him Elmer. So, it's kind of awkward. And same thing with Jimmy Russell. You try to, you appreciate all that they've done and all that they've contributed. But I'm really just down to earth. I sit down. I like good bourbon, just like you. And so I'll be Freddie and you'll be Trevor. And anybody that sends something in, if they say Mr. Johnson, he'll be offended. Freddie will be offended. So it's always Freddie.
Thank you for clearing that up. Sorry, my mama taught me to use sirs and miss and ma'am. So, but I'm glad that we're on a level now that we can just be Freddie and Trevor. That means a lot. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So, Freddie, please tell us about what you do at Buffalo Trace, and obviously your rich history with the distillery and the brand for those that may be not familiar with who you are and with your history.
Okay. So just in a snapshot, officially, I'm Freddie Johnson. I'm a third direct generation to be at Buffalo Trace Distillery. My grandfather and Colonel Blanton met on the riverbank behind the distillery as kids, and they became friends. Old Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn kind of a story. They were there together for 52 years, Trevor. My grandfather became the first African-American warehouse manager, and he took care of the barrels at Buffalo Trace Distillery. He kept up with 250,000 barrels on paper ledgers. So that was Granddad. That was the Stags and all of that came out. Ancient Age. All those were Granddad products. A little bit later along comes my dad and Elmer T. Lee. And Dad and Elmer have an interesting background. My father was a civil engineer, and he made landing strips on remote islands. Elmer was actually a bombardier, and Elmer's planes would land on Dad's landing strips during the war. So it was really kind of cool. They became friends at Buffalo Trace Distillery, and they were there together for 47 years. So the background, Elmer at 90 years old became one of only 3 living master distillers to have a whiskey named after him. And the other 2, as you guys well know, one was Booker No with Jim Beam, that was Booker's. And you had Jimmy Russell with Wild Turkey Russell Reserve. So Elmer gets that distinction at 90. Dad at 94 years old had become the only living person to personally handle every millionth barrel that ever came through Buffalo Trace Distillery. So I'm the 3rd direct generation to be there. I am known as the Buffalo Trace VIP visitor lead for special events, tours, and things like that for visitors' experience, as you well know. The cool part about it is a guy by the name of Steve Akeley he started doing a little check on the number of lives that I had touched. And they had estimated that it was over 250,000 people. And because of that, he started a petition. And that petition was to have me inducted into the Bourbon Hall of Fame. So the kooky part about all this is, I am the first tour guide that has ever been inducted into the Bourbon Hall of Fame. And it's really kind of crazy. And they realized that this bourbon, your club, if you think about it, it's a conduit. The liquid in the glass, just a conduit. It is something that provides you the opportunity to spend time with people you like to be with. And he just played on that, and they started to look at the bourbon industry and how visitors were starting to come around to all these different distilleries. And part of that got started by the documentary Neat. So that's all I'm doing is I'm just someone that helps people look at life a little bit differently.
And you do a damn fine job at it, sir. Or Freddie, sorry. So can you talk a little bit about how you came to work at the distillery, right? Because you weren't always a tour guide at Buffalo Trace. You had another career before that. Can you tell us a little bit about that history?
Yeah. So let's just sum it up this way. They're called coulds and shoulds in life. So, and Trevor, I know, like when you made the decision to get involved with Eureka and do all this, coulds and shoulds. The reason that you have the following that you have is because there are things that you could have done, and for some reason you took it to the next level. That's the should. So for me, my original career was I was with AT&T, and I ended up being a network systems design engineer, and I worked directly with Bell Labs. And we did network configurations. We did underground military sites. I had a top secret security clearance. I worked out of the Network Operations Control Center. The crazy part about it was I had promised my dad that I would work at the distillery during his lifetime. And what happened was, in the midst of my career, my father called me one day and told me he was terminally ill and asked me would I keep my promise and come home and be his caregiver and work at the distillery while he was still alive. So the coulds, I thought I could continue on with my career and take care of him at the same time. But I didn't understand chemo. I didn't understand those treatments and what they do to you. And my father never complained. And one day, one of my business trips got canceled, and I got to spend the weekend with him after his treatment. And I saw what my dad was going through. And at that point, he broke my heart. And I said, I'm coming home, Dad. And I'll just say this, and I'll tell you why this is important to me, and I think for others that are spending the evening with us. My commute into New York, I lived in New Jersey. I worked in New York. My commute into New York, it's called the Path, and you take it out of Hoboken, New Jersey, goes underneath the Hudson, and it used to terminate underneath the World Trade Center. And from there, you take your subway down to where you're going in Manhattan. So I'm out on the farm. I come back to take care of my dad. I'm out on the farm, and somebody comes by and says, "Have y'all seen what's going on up in New York?" And I said, "No." They said, "You need to go in and turn on the TV." We go in, we turn on the TV. The planes are flying into the World Trade Center. My dad and I have a meltdown. My dad gives me the biggest hug. He starts crying, and he says, "I really love you, son." I said, "I love you too, Dad." And at the point of that hug, it was 3 minutes before 9 o'clock. And at that point, I would have been dead. I would have been underneath the World Trade Center when the planes hit the building. I did a should and gave up the could, which was keeping up with my own career. I come back to take care of my dad and keep a promise. I call it promises made, promises kept. Come back to take care of my dad. And in taking care of my dad, he saved my life. So that's part of why I started looking at life, and I started looking at this industry, and I started looking at bourbon differently. And that's why in the documentary Neat, the part when I talk about sharing the last bottle with my dad, most people don't realize the significance of that. But it's a happy ending to a really cool story.
And how did and that's amazing. Things happen in our lives, and it's that leave you speechless, and that's knowing that you could have been there, and like you said, your dad in one way or another saved your life. It's just words can't describe that, that feeling, I'm sure. Speaking of the Neat documentary, I mean, if first of all, if any of our members watching have not watched that before, I can't remember what streaming service it's currently on, but if you just Google Neat, the story of bourbon, I'm sure you can find it somewhere out there to watch. I highly, highly recommend it. Obviously, Freddie, you're amazing in it, and it's just if you're into whiskey, which you are if you're watching this, I highly recommend seeking out that documentary. Now, when you were first approached for that documentary, did you think it would turn into what it did and kind of have such acclaim, or what was when they first approached you, said, "Freddie, we want you to be in a documentary about whiskey"? I guess what were your initial thoughts?
Wasn't really sure. It was like, I thought maybe it was just a PR thing. They were going to come in, we're going to film a little bit about Buffalo Trace, and that would be kind of fun. And they were going to, Marianne was in it, Jimmy Russell's in it, I think Parker and Booker in it. It was a bunch of us in it. The deal was, I just thought it would just be something kind of cool to do. Little did I know that something happened over in in Warehouse C. And what happened was this guy, one of the camera technicians, was trying to adjust one of the lamps, bumps the barrel. And when he bumps the barrel, all this dust and dirt came down across the camera lens. And on the screen we were monitoring from, it looked like we were in a giant snow globe in a warehouse. And I flipped out and I started telling this story about the last bottle of bourbon I shared with my dad. And we just never thought it would have the impact that it just had. But I think that like what you're doing and the programs that you're presenting, it's becoming obvious to more and more people that there's always going to be more bottles and bourbons of whiskey. And
well, I'd love for you to share that story at the end, if we can wait, because you shared that story the last time we were on together, and we ended with it, and I just think it's such a wonderful story. So if you don't mind, if you don't mind telling that again at the end, that would be great.
Yeah, and I have a toast to you and the folks that are tuning in to spend time with us this evening. But I noticed, Trevor, that you're doing something that I'm just sitting here and I was trying to be patient and waiting. I noticed that you've been sipping a little bit on the side there, Daddy-O. So
got me red-handed.
So I'm going to I'm going to start with my first one here. So, yeah,
And are you doing Buffalo Trace first? Or are you doing Eagle Rare first?
Buffalo Trace first.
Okay. So cheers.
Salute.
While we sip on this, obviously growing up around the distillery, I'm curious on two questions. What's the first memory you have of being at the distillery, and what's your favorite memory of being at the distillery?
So I used to play there as a kid, but my first real encounter with the distillery was my dad and I and my brother. We were fishing behind the distillery. It's called the dry house. It's where we take the mash and dry it and make it into sweet tin for horses and dog food and basically food for catfish, grain-fed catfish and stuff like that. So we're back there behind the dry house. Fish aren't biting. So they have a trap door in the base of the dry house. It has a ladder so that the workers can actually go down and they can see. We have some valves and stuff underneath of the floor. And they can come down and they can see if there's anything wrong. They can see the river, but it's a nice little way of coming up. So I'm bored and I just decided to go over there and climb up the ladder. And I looked like a little groundhog sticking his head up out of the hole. And I'm looking around and up through the floor. And one of the guys in there recognized me and he says, "Oh, you're Jimmy's boy." I said, "Come on in." So I climb on up the ladder and I'm back there in the dry house and I'm looking at all this stuff and I'm blown away. So what happens is I'm looking at all the mechanics and how all this stuff works, and he lets me walk around in there and stuff. And that was the first time I was back in the active working part of the plant. So that's where the cookers, the steels, the hammer mills, and all of that are back over in that area. The fermenters are all back over in that area, and I got a chance to see that. And it just blew me away because I was able to put the pieces together. Most people think about the barrels, they think about the warehouses, they think about the proof, and they think about the color and the flavor, but it really starts on the other side. And then you start talking about the farmers and the grain and the yeast and how long do you let it ferment, or what proof do you want to bring it off the still at, or just a bunch of really cool things. How fine do you want to mill the grain to, and what farmers do you want to do business with? And I just got blown away with the whole thing, and I was like, oh my gosh, if kids in school really understood the bourbon industry, you could go from IT. You could do marketing, you could do chemistry, biochemistry, you could do, you could associate with arbors, wood. I mean, it's amazing all the components that go into a distillery. So for me, stumbling upon that, basically my background's engineering, chemistry, and science. Trevor, I was blown away. I got excited about that. And whenever I could, I would always go down to the distillery with my dad. And that just started me on a journey. So when I came back there to take care of my dad, I was like coming back home again. And it was just really kind of nice seeing how all of these things were continuing to evolve into where they are today. It's really kind of a cool story.
Well, I can't imagine. I mean, I've had the pleasure of going to Buffalo Trace a handful of times, and I'm blown away every time I go. Which is, I think, a good segue into my next question. Growing up at the distillery, seeing it throughout the years, I guess what is with all the expansion that's happened recently, like how how much has it changed, and how much has it changed and how much has it stayed the same? Because, and maybe talk about the recent expansion, because it's and we've talked about it on, I think, our last call last month, where we had Katie O'Donnell on talking about Weller. But what's it been like for you to see the expansion of the distillery, given your history, and seeing it when you were a kid versus now?
That is that's like watching Disney World grow. I mean, it is, if you think about the distillery itself, the footprint now, we're on a little over 440 acres. Okay. And it started off, it was only like 100 and something acres. So we're back to the original size of the distillery. So 440 acres. They were building, as they were, because we basically maxed out where we're located now. But they were building a new warehouse every 3 months. Each new warehouse was 58,800 barrels. It cost $27.4 million to build one of those and to fill it with those 58,800 barrels. The cool part about it, Trevor, is they are the only warehouses like it in the world. So Hall and Wheatley took the best aging characteristics, and I'm sure the folks on the call with us now, on the cast with us, they know about Warehouse C. So Warehouse C is probably one of the coolest warehouses in the world, the way it ages whiskey. So Harlan has mapped Warehouse C, K, LP, a bunch of them. He took the best characteristics of these really good warehouses and made them into a hybrid of the new warehouses that we're building up on top of the ridge. So Warehouse C has a dirt floor. Well, the new warehouses have a raised floor with a crawl space underneath, just like Warehouse C has. However, it's a radiant floor. It's a dual zone system. You run warm water and cold water through it, and you replicate the ambient temperature of the earth, but you're doing it without moisture. It's a controlled environment, 340 windows in each one, and they are kicking. So that's what we're working on now, is we're working on a farm tour at Buffalo Trace, where we take visitors up to the new warehouses that we built and let them see what they are like. So that's going on. The new steel, 4 stories tall, 7 feet in diameter, 14 primary plates, and they crank out 60,000 gallons of whiskey a day.
Jeez.
So yeah, so we went from a little old small column stills that E.H. Taylor did to these giant fermenters, and the fermenters are 93,000 gallons each. We now have 24 of them, and they're putting in 8 more. So we'll have a total of 32 of these giant fermenters, some of the largest in the industry. Plus, we'll be running both stills at the same time. So the new still is a replica of the old still. So when we fire them both up at the same time, we'll be cranking out 120,000 gallons of hooch a day. So yeah.
Do you know what that number was when you were a kid? How many gallons they produce a day?
You ready for this? At one point, this is so crazy. At one point during the slow period, they only did 2,000 barrels for the whole year. For the whole year, 2,000 barrels.
Was that in the 80s?
And you ready for this? Now they do 2,000 barrels a day. Crazy. But yeah, so I'm excited about that. But the cool part is, if you take that and then you look at the visitors' experience coming in with that, that's where it goes to the next level. Because what actually happens is we had projected that we wouldn't hit 500,000 visitors until 2025. We surpassed that last year. So we have already exceeded the forecasted visitors, and we're growing at a rate of 20% per year, actual visitors. So when you take the excitement of visitors coming in and you start taking them through the distillery and actually getting them to see a lot of the things that they normally don't get to see at other distilleries, I think the sky's the limit. We're working on 3 new tour routes so people can see some other things that they don't normally get to see.
Well, again, if you have the opportunity to go out to Buffalo Trace, please do so, and please, I'd sign me up for that new tour. I'd love to see those new rick houses and see what you guys have done. That system with the ambient temperature of that sounds super cool.
It's amazing. So when he designed these things, we were like really kind of like, okay, what do we have here? And like I said, all I can tell you, it's hard to describe it until you walk into one of them, and you can go from one floor to the next to the next. And it's amazing how the temperature is actually being controlled so that you don't have really harsh hot and cold spots. With this radiant floor, everything is the atmosphere is just an even laid out arrangement.
Are there other things? You mentioned there were other things that Harlan and the team did there. Can you share maybe one or two other things that they did to kind of replicate the same environment of Warehouse C in these new rick houses?
Okay, so the other thing, so one of the things that Harlan did was I was asking him, because I like to tour other distilleries, and a lot of the distilleries have gone to palletizing the barrels and using metal ricks basically to put the barrels into. And Harlan says, well, we'll never do that. And I said, well, why? And he says, well, if you're trying to move your barrels around pretty fast, if you're high volume, he says, you can do that. He said, but the interesting part of Warehouse C, which is the oldest warehouse on the property, all the ricks and the flooring and stuff are wood. And he said, what actually happens is the wood is actually breathing, and it's taking in a portion of that angel share. It is actually basically enhancing not only the atmosphere, but as that whiskey moves in and out of the wood, that wood around that barrel is enhancing the taste profile of the whiskey while it ages. And I'm like, well, that's pretty darn cool, Harlan. And he just smiled. And he says, that's just part of, time in a barrel. He says, these are the things, the atmosphere around that barrel will be indicative of the flavors some of the flavors you're going to get out.
Well, again, that's super cool. I look forward to being able to see that with my own two eyes. Got a couple more questions, Freddie, and then we'll taste the whiskey and hear your insight on the Buffalo Trace and the Eagle Rare itself. I'm going to cheat here on my cheat sheet. So recently, I think within the past day or two, there was an announcement that Buffalo Trace was going to be bringing back 5 Prohibition era whiskeys for a limited time. And I'm not sure what you can or can't share about that, but I believe the brands are 3 Feathers, Old Stag, Golden Wedding, Walnut Hill, and George T. Stagg Sirius Frumenti, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Can you maybe give some insight on those brands and what we can be excited about here coming up with these revived whiskeys?
So when they roll that out, it's actually a package. If you look at the way it's being presented, you get all the bottles in a pack together, and they are 375 bottles. A lot. So that's, I'll just say it this way. So there are things that I can't say. Okay. But everything started with an original recipe. So Mash Bill 1 was actually a new recipe that was created. Mash Bill 2 is what we know as Ancient Age and Stag and Elmer Teely and Blanton's, Hancock Reserve and Rock Hill Farms. So part of what they did was they looked at Mash Bill 1, they looked at Mash Bill 2, and some of these are basically creations that Harlan has done. And then if you look at the packaging or what they have shared so far is the other part is with Drew Mabel. So Drew Mabel is our master blender. So this is a combination of the two of them partnering and creating these taste profiles that are indicative of when that whiskey was first created many years ago. So what I can share with you is the way that they did this using basically knowledge of the previous products is they did some stuff over in the lab, and we know that the human body tastes things in parts per million. They took it to the next level, and we're looking at things in parts per billion to look at taste profiles and molecular structures and how they will infuse and work together. So that's part of what is going on here. So when people ask, how can you replicate these products, they have done that. That's the cool part about it.
Wow.
Can't tell you much more about it until it rolls out and you get a chance to taste these. And hopefully we'll get a chance to come back, and when it's released and you got it, then we can sip and we'll talk a little bit about which menu, which recipes and some other stuff. Can't talk very much about that one.
I look forward to that. Is there any scheduled release date for that you can share, or is that still to be determined?
Well, probably the next thing that's going to be announced is going to be the antique collection. Okay, so that will be coming out the first part of October. So we are extremely excited about this release. I'm telling you, Trevor, if you can't get all the bottles, get with some friends and y'all individually get them. I am so excited about this year's antique collection. There'll be a little appetizer or teaser that I was just involved in, but it's just good. And I'm not just talking about one. I mean, the proof is up on some, the age is up on some, and when you taste them, you would never ever know that the proof is as high as it was, and you will also not know that they were as old as they were. So I'm telling you what, I just had some, and I'm telling you, I was like, oh my Lord. I said, we thought that William Rue Weller was off the charts. We thought the Sazerac was off the chart. We thought the Eagle Rare was off the chart, and they've just done it again. So these are going to be, once again, some of they're going to be voted some of the best whiskeys in the world. I have not tasted anything like these since they first started rolling out the antique collection. That's how good these are.
Any plans for releasing more Pappy 25 at any point?
Oh my Lord. So we have a large number of experimental barrels, and did we get to go back to the vault? They call it the last drop.
Yep.
Okay, so that's where all of that started, and that experiment and what we were doing with some of those barrels. So Double Eagle and OFC 25 come out of there. That experiment proved to be so successful. We've more than tripled the space of the vault. So that whole area, when you walked in and walked back down into that little area where looked like the banker's safe was, that whole area now, Trevor, that whole area from the moment you walk in the door is nothing but the last drop. That whole section. We've got additional units in there. We are controlling the temperature at about 46 to 47 degrees. And we think that we're well on the way of making bourbon that's it's going to pass Pappy 25. It'll be, uh, we think that we can make a 50-year-old bourbon that tastes just as smooth as a Weller 15.
Well, you guys continue to innovate and impress. So I'm looking forward to everything upcoming. I do have about 2 ounces of Pappy 25 that I am was gifted, and am saving for a special occasion. I've yet to determine what that occasion will be, but I'll have to take after your tradition and share it with maybe 1 ounce for me and 1 ounce for someone special.
Well, they say you should never drink alone.
True. That's why you get married, right?
No, that's why you have a dog. But I'll tell you a fun one. If you take the Pappy 25 and the OFC 25, if you take those two, the Pappy 25 and OFC 25, and put them down next to each other and nose them and do this little thing that we're going to do with the water, it's called acclimation. You can spend an evening just with those 2 pours, Trevor. I'm telling you, man, it's just, there's so many layers to those 2 products at that age because of where they sat in the warehouse that you think that you've got them all, and then something else comes at you. So, and we're going to play with a little bit of that here in just a moment. We start doing these. So,
let's get into the, well, I got to find someone that can give me a bottle of OFC 25 then. Sorry, I'm getting a little dark in here. I'm going to see if I can turn on this light. All right. So let's, I do want to get to some questions just in a few minutes here. Can we run through tasting some Buffalo Trace and Eagle Rare with you? You want to start with Buffalo Trace and tell us a little bit about the brand and your tasting notes here?
Yeah. So Buffalo Trace is 7 to 9 years old. Comes from the middle floors of the warehouse. Most of the press that you see on it says that it comes off the still about 140. Well, it can't go into the barrel any higher than 125, and that's what it goes in at. So it's going into the barrel at 125. And when this comes out, it's running in the 130 range. So that's about where it sits, about usually 129 to 131. So if you think about that and you think about Stag, it's about that same proof, uncut, unfiltered. Isn't that crazy? So a lot of people, when we talk about this and they talk about Buffalo Trace and how good it is, and then they talk about how wonderful Stag is, well, basically it's the same mash bill. It's just that this one is opened up by cutting it to 90 proof. I always like to just take the glass and I just look at them. And when you take your bourbon and swirl it around, a lot of people don't realize you wait. You just do that a couple of times and you wait. And what you're looking for is you're looking to see how long does it take for that coating to break. And that's your viscosity. That will give you an idea of the solids that remained in there that are going to be your little flavor nodes when it strikes your palate. You're going to get the heat and the spiciness, but you swirl it around, you're increasing the surface area. And people play with this all the time, but I try to get them to understand when you're nosing your bourbon, the human body is actually doing something kind of cool. Since we were born, most people don't realize this. They know they're supposed to take their glass and swirl it around. And they know they're supposed to nose it. And you'll see them, they'll swirl it around and then it's wrong. You ready for this? If you swirl it around, you increase the surface area, and you can do this roughly once every 2 to 4 hours, your body changes the dominant nasal passage you breathe from. So what people don't get when they're nosing it is they've increased the surface area. The alcohol volatiles are coming up into the chimney. So instead of sticking your whole nose in on your first approach, you do one side, and then you do the other side. What will blow your mind is you can smell Buffalo Trace on both sides, but I be dipped. I can smell it better on one side than I can on the other. So what the body is actually doing is it closes down one side of your nasal passage. It allows it to remoisturize itself. Its purpose is to trap dust and particulates that would normally go straight into your lungs and be harmful to your respiratory system. So that helps you to understand why sometimes inadvertently your nose will run for no reason at all. That's why we sneeze, is your body detected something and it's kicking it out before it even gets into your lungs. So that's why when you're nosing, if you do one side and then you do the other side, and then very gently you go in full nose with your mouth open a little bit, and what you're actually doing is you're picking up on subtle nuances that you would normally have missed. It's really kind of kooky. But if you start doing that, you realize I be dipped. Yep.
Well, my right nostril seems to be the dominant one at the moment.
And mine's the left. And what you can do is when you do it, do you notice you remember Buffalo Trace is coming from the middle floors. And when you do that, you can actually feel a little bit of a tingle up in your nostril on the one that's the dominant one. You can feel a little bit of a tingle. And that's where more alcohol volatiles are going up that side than the other side. And a couple hours from now, it'll be different. So that's how you're able to pick up on things. The difficulty when people are playing around with really high proof bourbons and they do this and they go full nose in, the alcohol vapors go up both sides and it prevents you from picking up on a lot of the subtleties that would normally be detected. It's kind of crazy, but that's Freddie. So anyway.
Freddie, give me 1 second. I'm having, I think my lighting is off here a little bit. But just give me 1 second. Sorry.
Hook it up.
All right. I don't know if that's any better. Maybe not. But awesome. Well, so we're tasting Buffalo Trace. We obviously send our members out our tasting cards here that have my notes on them. And this being a barrel pick, the nose and palate can vary from barrel to barrel. But
my last, yes. Yep.
But I believe you're tasting standard Buffalo Trace, not a barrel pick, or am I mistaken?
Well, I will show you this. It is a barrel pick.
Oh, nice.
So believe it or not, when we did the raffle for the single barrel selection in March. So this is a bottle from one of the barrels. So yeah, so I like to do stuff like this. So yeah, but Trevor, it's a cool question. So a lot of people don't understand small batch versus single barrel. And the uniqueness is you've got 35 to 40 staves in the making of the barrel. So what's going to happen is that represents 35 to 40 different trees. And the size of the stave is going to determine that tree's contribution to the flavor in that barrel. So that's why barrel picks, even though the mash bill is the same, the age is pretty much the same. If you remember, when you look at the batch number or the number of barrels associated with the batch, they come from different parts of the warehouse. And so that combination of staves and sitting in different parts of the warehouse produces different flavors. But here's your fun part. You got that?
Yeah, I was just looking at what barrel number I had.
So the winning number for the that was actually in the clubhouse when we did the single barrel selection was their number was 359. That was their winning number. But here's all right. So watch this. Okay. So now you've had a chance to taste it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So think of the barrel, your single barrel, Think of a dartboard, and the barrel is one of the darts. And as long as that barrel falls within the target taste profile, it's a Buffalo Trace barrel. All right. But when you do single barrel selections, they are uniquely different. Your bullseye is when you take those barrels and marry them together. I didn't get a chance to do the when you did your barrel selection, but what I tell people to do is whenever you do a barrel selection, let me just say this another way. This is really for your team. What you want to do is when you do a barrel selection, you're getting individual barrels. In most cases, the product, the flagship product, is a small batch associated with those single barrels that you're doing. So when you get your individual pours, you can go through and decide which one you like. But I tell people at the end, after you've made your decision, make an infinity glass. Take those separate ones and pour them together. And when you commingle those glasses associated with your single barrel pick, you will be blown away. It will be the flagship product. It will be a Buffalo Trace. It will be a Weller Special Reserve. But individually, you can taste the differences. You bring them together, it tastes just like the one you see in the store. That's what's cool about this whole thing. So that's the first piece. Now, we're going to break it down a little bit. We're going to do it with the Buffalo Trace. We were talking about notes. The two things that I like when I'm actually playing around with bourbon is I start off with the nose. And the next thing I do is I check out the mouthfeel. So when I'm swirling it around in a glass, it's giving me an indication of what I should experience when it strikes my palate. So you ready for this journey? So if you take your glass, I'm sure others have their glasses out there with them. I know you got some water on the side. All right. Okay. Watch this journey. So what we're going to do is take a sip of water first. So we're a newbie. We're going to take a sip of water first. As you know, they call this cleansing your palate. All right. Well, Trevor, I just call it rinsing out your mouth. But anyway, all right. So now watch this. We're not going to shoot the Buffalo Trace. We're going to kiss it. Take your Buffalo Trace. This is going to get you acclimated, and it's going to tell you a lot about what's going on with this bottle of bourbon before you even take a swallow. You're going to kiss it. Just take it and just splash it up against your lips. Instinctively, your tongue comes out. Boom. All right. And the tip of your tongue, it's spicy. You got a little bit of heat. You can feel it lightly coating your lips. It's not heavy, but it burns a little bit. And that's telling you, it's only 90 proof, but what it's telling you is there was heat involved with the aging of this whiskey. Remember, Buffalo Trace comes from middle floors, and those middle floors, the temperature is warming up and cooling down, moving the whiskey in and out of the wood. It's very definitive, the difference between Buffalo Trace and Eagle Rare, because Eagle Rare comes from the ground levels. And when we do this with the Eagle Rare, you're going to notice they're entirely different, even though they're the same recipe. Now, next piece. All right, so you're going to kiss it first. Now, you ready for this? Now we're going to take a sip of water. You're going to hold the water in your mouth, and with the sip of water in your mouth, now revisit your Buffalo Trace with that sip of water in your mouth and roll it around on your tongue and watch what happens. All right? You got it? You roll it around on your tongue. Boom. You get the punch of the rye. You get the oak. You get the char. You get the heat. But it's mellow. And midway to your palate, when you do that, it starts to finish off like a really nice bourbon. And it just trails off very, very nicely. It doesn't continue to slam you. That robustness is at the front. Midways, it mellows out. It gets to the back of your palate, and it just makes your mouth water a little bit, and then it's gone. All right.
Amazing.
So I tell people, if you are not familiar with the product, somebody gives you a pour of something you're not familiar with, you can nose it, you kiss it, start with a bigger sip of water, and then just do it a couple of times, but each time reduce the amount of water that you're holding in your mouth. And then you can do neat. So now if we did neat, after having done it with the water, okay, now there's no surprises. I expect the heat, right? It's there, but now I can actually feel it building and going back. It makes my mouth water. I still got the burn. I got a little bit of heat, but it still dances across my palate. Now, this, man, you got me on a journey here tonight. Okay, so here's the deal. A lot of people know that they're supposed to do something with the water, but they're never really talked to about if you don't do it in the right sequence, you miss it all. And if you've ever heard people say, I don't get it. I don't get what you're tasting. You ready for this? We're going to do Buffalo Trace in reverse. And when I show you this, you're going to go, well, I be dipped. So what we're going to do, this time you're going to take a sip of Buffalo Trace first, hold the Buffalo Trace in your mouth, and then take a sip of the water and do the same thing. And watch what happens this time. Swig of the Buffalo Trace. Take a swig. Blah. Blah. Nothing. All the other things are gone. Isn't that amazing? So when you're,
it was much harsher. Like I feel like it wasn't as pleasant that way.
No, it's like, what is this in my mouth? You know, all the things that you were enjoying a moment ago, basically the water just, it's gone. So the alcohol had what actually happens is the alcohol has become dominant on your tongue. And when you put the water with it, you can't break it down. It's like the alcohol has already basically fried your palate. So you miss everything else. So I try to get people to understand, if you do the water and hold different increments of water in your mouth, and you don't put the water, some people say, well, just put a little cap full of water, put a couple of drops in your glass. The problem is, if you over dilute, you can never get back to your original pour. So what I do is I play with that water separately because I can control what's hitting my palate. But if I over dilute, I've ruined the whole thing. So that's my point in getting people to try that. So it's a cool thing to do.
Freddie, you teach me something new every time we talk. I love it.
Now, if you like this journey, we're going to now. I just saw a lot of people ask about. They can't believe that Buffalo Trace and Eagle Rare are the same recipe. It's like it's just because of the differences in the taste. But if you go to the beginning of Mash Bill 1, it starts off as benchmark. And, you know, we had all those different expressions of benchmark and foolproof and top floor and all kinds of kooky stuff. But I did it. I was up in Newport at a restaurant up there, up in Newberry's. And we did a full tasting with just the benchmark expressions. And they were blown away. And it was a fun event, but it helped them to appreciate the different stages of maturity of Mash Bill 1. So you start at benchmark, then you go to E.H. Taylor, then you go to Buffalo Trace. Sitting between Buffalo Trace and Eagle Rare is George T. Stagg. All right. You go on the other side of Eagle Rare, you're at Big Daddy Stagg Antique. All right. Then you go to your Eagle Rare 17. All right. Then you go to your Double Eagle 20. And then you go to OFC 25. So it's a cool journey. And all it is where we put the barrel in the warehouse, which warehouse we put it in, and how long you leave it sit. So let's see if this works. So you got your Eagle Rare ready? Okay, hang on. Let me get ice covers here. Now, I like to do this. So I take them and I look at them. And the first thing I notice is I look at my Eagle Rare. If you've not done this and you compare the two together, what you notice is it takes longer for your legs to break with the Eagle Rare than it does with the Buffalo Trace. And even though they're both 90 proof, the Eagle Rare has been sitting in the warehouse on the lower levels. The temperature fluctuations are not the determining factor, it's the barometric pressure. So now the storm fronts, these barometric pressure changes, is very slowly moving the whiskey in and out. So it's like marinating a piece of meat. So the oak is actually getting quite saturated, and the alcohol is getting a chance to break down more of the caramelized sugars and saps and rosins in the fibers of the wood. So it produces an entirely different coating on the inside of your glass, and the nose is entirely different. So even though it's the same product, you can actually smell the difference. So I can still pick up on heat with this Buffalo Trace. You don't find it with, and even though they're both 90 proof, it's not there with the Eagle Rare.
Yeah, I get more of that rye spice character on the Eagle Rare too than I do on the Buffalo Trace.
Oh, yes. So you ready for this journey?
Yes.
Watch what happens this time. Watch what happens this time. And this is when you really appreciate Eagle Rare. So let's take that sip of water, get rid of the BT. Let's kiss the Eagle Rare and watch what happens. It's sweet. My lips have the viscosity, the coating on my lips is more pronounced. I don't have all that heat. And it's inviting. All right. It's very soft. You notice it's just a soft feel on your lips.
Yeah.
Watch. All right. Now watch this. Take a swig of water. This time, hold the water in your mouth and take a swig of this Eagle Rare and watch what happens. You take a swig of the Eagle Rare and whoosh, Trevor, you can feel it coating the inside of your mouth. There's no oak. There's no char. There's no heat. All of a sudden, you get these sweet caramel toffee notes coming at you. It floods your mouth waters, you swallow, and your mouth keeps lingering with these soft, subtle notes. It's real. I mean, and they're the very same products. It's amazing. So you can talk a moment. I have to go on this journey with you.
Yeah, I think with the Buffalo Trace, I got a lot of like brown butter cookie notes when I was tasting. I do get a little bit more of that rye spice. I have to cheat and look at what I have on my notes here. Eagle Rare to me has always had a lot like kind of reminds me of those chocolate oranges you get at Christmas time. I feel like it has some orange rind and some chocolate and but
little bit of it, kind of like a citric kind of a note to it. A lot of people will pick up on that soft buttery feel reminds them of honey. You'll get a lot of that. A lot of them, it will remind them of if you've never had an old leather chair, they get a little bit of kind of like if you've ever smelled that when you're nosing an old leather chair, you get a little bit of that kind of like.
I always I've used the description my dad's wallet in the past.
Yes.
You get that. I think at least I remember the smell of my dad's, like the leather smell of my dad's wallet when I was a kid. I don't know why I was smelling my dad's wallet, but
you know, you get sometimes people will talk about where they didn't like I was trying to give someone an idea. I was talking to this person about this. They talk about tannins all the time. You hear tannins all the time. the thing that I find amazing about, in comparison with the Eagle Rare to the Buffalo Trace, is um, it's it makes your mouth water. You get all these really nice creamy notes coming at you, but then it's it's kind of a dry finish to it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably the reason why it wins so many awards. Is it's a really delicate balance of soft, subtle notes that don't overwhelm you. You know, I was trying to think. You know, you try to talk about what things remind you of, um, and then when you sit down and if you have a mix of men and women, they will pick up on things, and you'll go like, "Well, where did that come from?" And then you go back, and I was playing around with the group the other day, and I went back and these new Century kits, the cool ones now are actually with oil. You know, some of the original ones, you would have little ground up pieces of different stuff. And those things, after a period of time, they would actually mold and get hard and just terrible. But the newer ones, they're oil based. And so you can use them multiple times, and you can go back and reference them without worrying about them going stale and messing up on you. So if you get a chance to, you may have already done that, but I just got another kit, and that was what I started doing. Was I said, okay, so let me play with some stuff, and I would just put it in just parts where the vein goes through, where it pumps a little bit of warmth up with it, and I just started playing with those, and I was like, okay, so this would be reminiscent. This would be reminiscent of if I was holding my glass in my hand and I'm warming it up a little bit. So a lot of people like to just hold their bourbon and they'll talk and they get away from the base. So the sane way is, you suppose, the reason for the base being like it is so that you don't warm up the glass like you would do a brandy. But more and more people are starting to basically put a couple of fingers on it. And what it's actually doing is it's warming it up just enough that you get some of the things that you would normally miss. Um, One person said, I smell roses. And I said, what? And she said, rose petals. She says, it smells like a rose when you just lightly nose a rose. And I'm like, I'd never even thought about it. And I was like, yeah, dried rose petals.
Yeah, I can see it, or I can smell it.
So, so it's I think a lot of times your mood, how you're feeling, um, will be an influencer in what you're tasting. If you've not done it, like I'll come, my daughter comes over here sometimes, and I may have 4 or 5 glasses sitting around in this room that I'm in, and they're all just sitting there. And she'll say, well, what are you doing? And I said, I'm tasting bourbon. And so what I'll do is I'll do fresh pours, and I'll nose them and I'll taste them. And I'll go away and do something else for a while. And then I'll come back and I'll nose them and I'll taste them again. And I'll go away and I'll come back. And what I'll do is I'll put little indicators of what did I pick up the second time that I didn't pick up on the first time. And you will be amazed as the volatiles dissipate and you get down into some of the other things that are there. And it actually, not only does it smell different, but it will taste different. And if you've never done this with uncut, unfiltered, barrel-proof bourbon, that's why I tell people you always rock a barrel-proof bourbon or a higher proof bourbon. You always do multiple pours with it, because you'll get residue in the bottom of your glass. If you just take a pour of uncut, unfiltered, barrel-proof bourbon and you do a drink from that and you just leave a little bit in the bottom of your glass, what will happen is if you've been sipping on it for a little bit, those solids, it will actually look like bacon drippings when they get cold. You'll get a little creamy looking little color down in the base of your glass. And those are flavor notes that you've missed. Those are things that you don't even think about. Man, listen to me. I'm rambling. The cool
Freddie, you're a wealth of knowledge.
I try to tell people, all right, so just like, all right, so if I was playing around with my Weller Foolproof, okay. So what I'm going to do with that, or if I do my George T. Stagg, if I do any of these, so this is a special pour. This is a Weller Foolproof, and a lot of people are doing non-chill filtered, as you well know, on a lot of these. There you go. All right. So what do we do with them? So you always talk about it, and then you give people a pour. All right. When you serve a good bottle of wine, or when you present it, you always, if you're at a restaurant, they present it to you. All right. And then they'll turn it over and they'll show you something on the back label. And then they'll open your bottle up. And then they do what is called a multiple pour. And what they're actually doing is when you start dealing with foolproofs, non-chill filtered, uncut, unfiltered, barrel proof, the solids that are in there are drifting to the bottom. And so when the bottle sits around for a while, over a period of time, those solids get down near the bottom. So that's why people think that some of their bourbons are getting better with time. They're getting down into those solids. And as long as the bottle stays warm, you can't see them. They're translucent. But in a real nice restaurant, when somebody pours you a drink of a special pour or barrel proof bourbon, they always give you what's called a multiple pour. You'll see them, oh man, this is a really good bourbon. Well, you think you get an extra shot or two of bourbon. No, they're actually discreetly redistributing those solids so that every drink from that bottle always tastes the same. That's what it's about. All right. So a heads up for people at home, if they've got uncut, unfiltered barrel proof bourbons, remember Stagg sits in the middle of these two. And when you finish your final pour, if you've got residual stuff in the bottom of your bottle, that tells you you've been pouring disproportionate pours. If you want to find out the number of suspended solids that you have in your product, take your bottle and put it in the fridge and leave it for a couple of hours. It won't hurt it. But what will happen is those solids, as long as this bottle is warm at room temperature, you can always see through them. You put it in the fridge. It's called a chill haze. You put it in the fridge, leave it for a couple of hours, and come back and look for the discoloration. And the more discoloration that you see, the more solids that you have in there, which means the more viscosity, the longer it's going to linger on your palate. Those are your little flavor notes floating around in there. It's crazy. There's this thing that somebody has just come out with now, and they know this, and they're showing people how you can do that and let those solids collect when you pour it into something. And then you can actually use those to flavor other drinks and stuff with. It's like bacon fat. It's crazy. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. But if you've not done that, you can take one of your, especially when you get your non-chill filtered, take that bottle and put it in the fridge. Or if you got a barrel-proof bourbon, put it in the fridge for a couple of hours. And you're going to see it go milky looking. Don't put it in the freezer because the water crystallizes. But in the fridge, the water is not affected, but you will see a chill haze. Ah. Oh Lord, you got me going again. Here we go.
Very good. I do want to get to our questions here from our members, but the last thing I wanted to we had talked about some song selections for a song that you feel represents Buffalo Trace and a song that you feel represents Eagle Rare. And I never want to rush you, Freddie, because I think you're one of the people in the world I can listen to talk for hours and hours. But if we can make it quick so we can get to the questions, I think that would be a good call. But yeah, let us know your two songs that you selected.
So my song for Buffalo Trace is Wagon Wheel. Rock Me Mama like a wagon wheel. It's just a fun, inclusive song, if I can say it that way, Trevor. If you've ever noticed, whenever that song comes on,
and you're the Darius Rucker version, right? Or Old Crow Medicine Show.
Darius Rucker.
Got it.
All right. Everybody starts singing. It's an inclusive song. and it makes you feel good, and you're laughing and you're talking. And for me, it just makes me kick back on thinking about these folks coming out here in these old wagons, rocking and back and forth. And the only thing that they've got to halfway get them through all that is the whiskey that they've made that they drink along the way. So that's why I really like the song. It's just a fun song that it's inclusive and everybody can enjoy it. So, and I think that's what Buffalo Trace is meant to be. It's one that you don't care about how somebody drinks it. You don't care what they mix it with. And you listen to that song and you're like, yeah, I can dig it. I can get there with that one.
I love
so
it.
That's Buffalo Trace.
So my pick for Buffalo Trace is from Scone Cash Players. It's kind of a soul jazz kind of a band, and the song is called Old Faithful, because that's what Buffalo Trace is for me. It's Old Faithful.
All right. And I'm going to do what you did, because you never told me what your two were before.
No, I didn't.
So I'm actually going to bring those up, and after we drop off of here, I'm going to listen to those and see where it takes me.
Wonderful. So what do you have selected for Eagle Rare for your song?
So for the Eagle Rare, the guy's name is Dominic Hammonds. He's a violinist. He uses electronic violins to do his songs with, and he does one with Tennessee whiskey. And when I do Eagle Rare, and if I'm at home, depends on my mood. I just love that the way he does it with the violin. It's not about the words. I mean, you're familiar with the words, but it's just the instrument and the way he plays it. And when I go into my zone, what I actually do is I get a cigar, and I will crank the volume up on that song. And my buddies know when they see me sitting outside on the porch with the cigar and my Eagle Rare, and that song is playing, they just toot the horn and they just go on. They'll wave and they'll go on by. They know, I don't need you right now to say hello, Freddie. Just leave me the hell alone. But it's my zone. And in the world that we live in, a lot of people don't take time for themselves. And if you've got a good bourbon that you can enjoy, and you got a good song, some music that you can listen to, it helps put everything in another space, and it allows you to kind of refocus on yourself. What did you come up with?
So we talked about this yesterday. I took kind of what you said and, your take on sipping Eagle Rare by yourself and just kind of enjoying yourself and enjoying the downtime. But I went a little bit more aggressive with it. There's an artist that I like his name is Petey, P-E-T-E-Y. And he has a song that's called Freedom to F Off. Fill in the expletive, but it's kind of just a song about doing what you want and not worrying about the consequences. And I listened to it and I was like, I want the freedom to F off and just drink Eagle Rare whenever I want. So a little bit more aggressive than your choice, but it's all about balance in life. So I was going
to say the journey's the same for both of us, is F off.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
All right. Well, great choices. We'll get those. We have a playlist. We'll get those added to. I do want to get to some questions. I know the call here is a little bit long and it's late over there, Freddie. So I'm going to kind of rapid fire some of these questions at you, and just so we can get to as many as possible, and we'll choose a winner. So again, just so we can get to as many questions as possible. Again, I hate to limit you, but maybe just one or two sentences for responses so we can get through as many as possible. Clark White asks, what is the one thing you want everyone to know about Buffalo Trace?
It is family focused, and it is about honoring tradition but embracing change. So one thing is like, if you think you've enjoyed what Buffalo Trace has done so far, hang on.
Awesome. Yeah, that's kind of a segue. Next question. Tim Moore asks, what are the things you're most excited about in regards to the future of bourbon in general?
The number of craft distilleries that are coming online, and they are just challenging the basic concept of how you make bourbon and how you make good bourbon. I think the most recent one is the guys up in Connecticut. They've got a scientific approach to some things that they're doing. And some people are being critical of them. But the deal is, how do you know about challenging technology and chemistry and all that unless you try it? And so it's just their objective is to, let's say, take a bourbon that's 10, 15 years old and make it in like maybe 4 or 5 years, half the time, and have it taste just as good as the one that's, 10, 15, 20 years old. So who knows? But yeah, so that's, for me, that's the exciting part of what's going on in the industry right now. I personally am not I would like Mother Nature and Father Time to provide the flavors. So a lot of the things where you're artificially adding things to your bourbon, or you're doing things as an adjacent something to make it taste like something. I just don't like to get into that. I like Mother Nature and Father Time.
Awesome. Robert Dewey asks, what Buffalo Trace product do you feel is the best expression of the distillery?
There's actually two, and it goes back to the mash bills. George T. Stagg and William LaRue Weller. And if you think about those two, those are uncut, unfiltered, aged products. That's the ultimate of all the expressions that reside underneath them. And that's part of the antique collection.
Awesome. Don Junker wants to know, what do you feel is the most significant driving factor in the popularity of Buffalo Trace?
That's a good question. I think it's the number of expressions that are offered at different price points that are winning awards. So it's what we have proven. I say we, it's the master distillers and warehouse managers, things that Dad and them discovered. What we have been able to show, is a better way of saying it, is it's not just an aged bourbon. It's not just an aged whiskey. An example I'm going to give you, Trevor, is for Robert, is think of Thomas Handy. Remember, Thomas Handy won the International Spirit. It won double gold. Thomas Handy. The Thomas Handy is, it's part of the straight rye window. It's just uncut, unfiltered, barrel proof. And it's only 6 years old. Oh, yeah. So age.
I'll take a bite.
Yeah. And so what we try to get people to understand is, when you look at all the Taylor expressions, 6 years old, 6 or 7 years old, and it's knocking the socks off of it. So, and then you take that all the way up to your Sazerac 18.
Love it.
Yep.
Linda Archer asks, what is the most bizarre request you have been able to fulfill for patrons at the distillery?
Okay, so Linda, was that her name?
Linda, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Linda, I cannot share publicly the most bizarre. So we have to be very guarded what gets posted on Facebook and stuff like that. But the most bizarre thing was very bizarre. Okay. The one that we
Can you
talked
share
about.
with us maybe a tamer request that you can share?
Sure. A tamer one was I was just asked to officiate a wedding.
Oh, wow. That's really cool.
The coolest one that's associated with something that happened. A couple comes in. This guy comes in with he's on tour, and on this tour is some a friend of a friend and her friend, and it was a blind date. And they were meeting at Buffalo Trace on my tour. It was the first time they ever met each other. We go on the tour together and we do a couple of things and they hit it off. A year and a half later, they're back on my tour again. And this time at the same spot where he met her, he proposes to her. Fast forward a year and a half later, back at the same spot, they get married. And the kicker is, in the interim, her father had passed away. And of all the folks that they could think of that they wanted to basically give her away, of all the relatives and all the friends, they came to Buffalo Trace and asked if I would give her away and wear an article of her father as I handed off the bride to this guy. That's probably the coolest thing that I've ever done. It's like you just don't realize lives you've touched until things like that happen. So yeah, that's probably the coolest thing, because that's just a cool memory moment that they still come back, and they've had an anniversary, they've done some other things, and
well, they have to name their firstborn child Freddie, right?
That's a whole other story.
Oh,
that's another story. Yeah.
I'm sure we could fill a full another hour with stories, but that's really cool.
Yeah. So Linda doesn't want to know the other one. No.
Sorry, my internet's a little spotty right now. We'll do a couple more questions just for the sake of time. I thank you for everyone for submitting questions. I wish we could get to them all. Let's see. This is a good one. If you could go back in time, this is Gary Mall. If you could go back in time, what master distiller from Buffalo Trace would you love to sit down and have a glass of whiskey with?
Gary Gayhart. So I've had a chance to sit with Elmer Tilly simply because Elmer Tilly and my dad were friends, and we used to go over to Elmer's house a lot. Gary Gayhart was the master distiller after Elmer, and he was there when Harlan Whitley came on the scene. So Harlan Whitley was an apprentice under Gary Gayhart and Elmer T. Lee. So he was under two master distillers for 14 years under their guidance. Gary Gayhart, you don't hear much about. He was an introvert. He is an introvert. He is a hell of an engineer. And he knows so much. And at one point, when I first started there, now this goes back to the beginning of 2000, like maybe 2002. And I was talking to him about good bourbon, and he said, "Why don't you come into my office for a little bit?" We go into his office, and he says, we talk about bourbon. He says, "Freddie, I'm going to tell you something. If you want a really, really good bourbon from our distillery," he said, "get a bottle of ancient age, 10-year-old." And I'm like, okay. He said, "That's really a really good whiskey. That's a really good bourbon." So if you think about what has happened is um, ancient age kind of went away. And then we have this product called Elmer T. Lee that's also 10 years old. That's a single barrel, which is one of the most sought after whiskeys around. Begin to make sense? So Gary knew so much about whiskey making. And the other person I would compare Gary Gayhart to would be the time I spent with Lincoln Henderson. Lincoln Henderson, who was the creator of Angel's Envy. Um, so I spent time with him before Wes Henderson took over the distillery. So Gary Gayhart for Buffalo Trace and Lincoln Henderson, who has passed away. Gary's still alive, but I think he's down in Florida now, so he's retired and moved away. But yeah, probably Gary Gayhart sitting down and just drinking with him.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to go again. I'm sorry. Wish we could get all these questions, but we're going to roll through the questions we did ask. And then Freddie, let me know which ones you like the best. And then I would love to end with the story about your father. I know it's late. Thank you for staying on. We had the question about what is the one thing you'd want everyone to know about Buffalo Trace, things you're excited about for the future of bourbon. What's the best expression from Buffalo Trace? What do you feel? What do you feel is the driving factor in Buffalo? The popularity of Buffalo Trace. The question about the most bizarre request you've received, and the question about.
And I'd have to throw Jimmy Russell in there also. Gosh, Jimmy and I, we just bumped into each other not too long ago. Another cool one. So of those that are alive, it would be Jimmy Russell and Gary Gayhart, because I won't see Lincoln for a while. Yeah. I hope. Yeah.
And then the last question was about who do you want to sit down and have a glass of whiskey with? So what were your favorite two questions out of those?
I do like the one about who would you like to have a drink with. I think that's probably the most insightful one.
And then what about your second choice?
The one that we were talking about this whole thing about craft distillers and new distilleries and what's going on in the industry. What was that one about? We did one about.
It was the future of bourbon.
Yeah.
So I have the hard job of deciding first and second place. I'm going to go first place for the. Who would you like to? What master distiller would you like to sit down with? I thought that was a really great question, given your long history with Buffalo Trace. So, Congratulations to Gary Mall for asking that question. And then second place is going to go to Tim Moore. Got some cool Eagle Rare and Buffalo Trace swag bags coming your way. Thank you for being a member and asking some great questions tonight. So, Freddie, we're wrapping up here. Thank you again for your time. I'd love for you to kind of share the story about your late father, and then your cheers to take us out, if you don't mind.
Okay. So you're talking about the last bottle that I shared with my dad?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm sure that on the call tonight, there are a number of folks that have some really, really good products that they probably have been showing to everyone their trophies, and they're sitting there. And you always get to tell the story. So you only bring out your good stuff with people you like. So you have to tell the story, and they see those bottles sitting there, and you talk about them, but you never open them up. So the story that happened to Freddie was when my father He had lived longer than he was supposed to, and he was determined to roll out the 6 millionth barrel. He made it. And because of that, my father, like these other old master distillers and these other old folks that work at distilleries, my father had never shared with me that he handled the Van Winkle barrels at Buffalo Trace Distillery. It was just part of his job. But when he rolled out the 6 millionth barrel and he achieved that, and he had become this person who had the only one that had ever done this, as a way of saying thank you, Julian Van Winkle presented my dad and I with a bottle of some of the original Pappy. This is when hand bottled by Julian. Julian and Betty used to put the labels on the bottles and do all the wax and all that stuff. And he gave me one of those bottles. This was the original wax coating on the Pappy bottles. And he says, Freddie, I want to give this to you, and I'm only going to ask that you don't share it. He says, I know it's quite valuable. He says, I'm going to ask that you not keep it, but share it with your dad. He says, do a pour with your dad from this bottle. And so, being the wise son that I am, I have the bottle and I bring it home, and I'm talking to my dad about, how special this Pappy 20 was with the wax on it and all this stuff, and Julian. And my dad is like, yeah. I got that, Freddie. He says, I handled the barrels. Let's just get on with the pour. Well, it caught me by surprise. I didn't even know he was the one handling the barrels. So what he did was, I said, okay, so now you know how you do this. You take the cork off the bottle and you pour. So I pour a little bit in my dad's glass, and I pour a little bit in my brother's glass, and pour a little bit in my glass, and I go to put the cork back in the bottle. And my father just looked at me. He says, what are you doing? And I'm like, Dad, I said, do you know how special this bottle is? He said, yeah. And I said, we're doing a toast. And he says, Freddie, I'm aware of what we're doing. I'm asking what you're doing. And I said, well, Dad, I'm just trying to save it so we can do some more toast later on. And he looked at me and he smiled. He says, Freddie, your father is 94 years old. He said, I really don't have a lot of toasting left in me. He said, promise me you'll never, ever do that again. I didn't understand the significance of the moment. I said, I don't get it, Dad. He says, well, you will when you go back down to the distillery and walk around. And he says, and you do it with people that are on your tour. And let them take it in. And he says, and what will become obvious to you is there will always be more barrels and bottles of whiskey. They've been at that distillery since the 1800s, and they'll be there long after you're gone. He said, but your friends and family won't always be around. He said, so if you think enough of them to bring the good bottle out, he said, make a memory. He says, don't worry about how they drink it. Just make a memory. Now, he said, the cool part is you tell them about the significance of the bottle, give them the pour. And he said, what you do is after you've given them a pour with a good bottle of wine, you set the bottle down and you put the cork beside it to allow the bottle to continue to breathe so that if you want another pour, it's okay to have one. He said, do that with your bourbon. You give them the pour, continue to make eye contact with them, set the bottle down and continue to talk with them and get the glass. And what you're telling them is, I'm not worried about the whiskey. If you want another pour, have another pour. He says, I'm enjoying you and the company. The significance of that. I did just that with my dad and my brother. We spent 3 hours together. It was the first time that my father and my brother and I had spent that much time together. No TV, no radio, no distractions, no one else but just us revisiting our lives together. We told stories, we laughed, we shared things that my dad didn't know that we knew about him. He shared things that he knew that we had done that he'd never told us we just laughed and had a blast. 3 hours. We nailed the bottle. I had to put my own father to bed, drunk as a skunk. All right. You ready for this?
Yes,
9
sir.
months later, They were both gone. So I could have, coulds and shoulds, Trevor. I could have told my dad, well, that's what you're saying, but that's all we're doing tonight, Dad. And put the bottle away. All right. I could have done that. But something said, let's just enjoy the moment. 9 months later, they were both gone. I could have still had that whiskey. But the memories that those 3 hours created, I would never, ever enjoy them. So that's my memory moment. And that's why I no longer save my bourbon. If you come to my house, you can see a lot of my bottles. They're just partially open bottles. They're all over the place around here. And what I'll do is, if you look at my bottles, they all have signatures on them. If you come to my place and I get a bottle, one of my special bottles, the only thing I'm going to ask you to do for me, just sign and date my bottle. That's all I'm asking you to do. Because now, not only have I given you a pour, but I've got a timeline of someone that I shared this bottle with and those memories of that moment that I shared with them. So that's what this is all about. It doesn't matter. And I don't talk about different products. It doesn't matter what it is. I've got all kinds of bottles around here and they all have signatures on them. And it's just like, if you don't, you've got a cool bottle, but that's all it is. It's just a cool bottle. So there you go, Trevor.
All right. Well, thank you, Freddie. I appreciate your time. I know it's late over there, but cheers to you, and thank you for your time. And it's always a pleasure. We hope to do it again.
All right. Let's finish with this toast.
Okay,
You ready?
go ahead. Yep.
There are tall ships and there are small ships. And there are wooden ships. They sink. The best ships are friendships. And to those ships, we shall drink. Salute, my friend.
Cheers. Thanks, Freddie. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.